In a universe that almost is, just out of reach beyond the edge of reality, mysterious forces underlie the fabric of existence. Energematrice 6, the very energy of creation, serves as both the elixir of life and the arsenal of destruction for its human and not-so-human denizens.
Crushing darkness, whose source they cannot fathom, grips the cosmos and its people. In anguish, they dream of the long-foretold bright star.
Join us as we embark on an epic journey, exploring the universe of Energematrice 6.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 32 of the Energematrice 6 podcast. We are going for chapter 9 of the Vale of Mysteries today. Thank you for being here, everybody. We have Mel, Luke, oldest, and second here today for chapter 9. Before we get started on that, let me hit the V for V ad. The Energematrice 6 podcast operates on a value-for-value model. That means that we hope if we provide some value to you in your life, that you'll return that to us in whatever way you can manage. If you're interested, head over to e6universe.com and sign up for our email list to get our free ebooks, and hopefully buy a physical book or some merch while you're there. Or if all you can manage right now is to leave us a good review somewhere, 5 stars or some kind of positive rating, that's more than appreciated. Thank you. This is chapter 9 of the Vale of Mysteries.
Sometimes justice simply means allowing nature to take its course.
The Adages of the Prelacy, official edition. Waiting for the veil to clear was frustrating. They had no real indication of what the progress actually might be, so all they could do was wait. The null gravity wore on some of them. Jesse and Ty seemed particularly affected, while the others were mostly bored. A few hours after they eased away from Lighthouse Station on a slow trip to the system's dust cloud boundary, they received a transmission from Elder Jabin, which Nate took on the ship's bridge. The transmission was delayed because, again, the station used light-speed transmitters. When Jabin's face came clear, the recording said, "Brightstar, I wish to extend the Council's and my own abject apologies for what happened to you. For what we did." He looked pained, but shook his head. "Not to excuse my own part in this, but I allowed Alden, former Elder Rebus, to manipulate me into that sham far too easily. I can at least report that Rebus and 4 of his associates are to be tried for attempted murder. Both Elder Rebus and Elder Eden have been removed from their council seats, effective immediately." The already tight lines on Jabin's face tightened even further. "When we arrested former Elder Rebus, we discovered far more than we would ever have guessed." Jabin paused as if not sure how to continue, then shook his head and shrugged helplessly. "We discovered that Alden Rebus was on the payroll of Drake Lorridon and had been for some time." Exclamations rose up all around Nate, but he was silent, digesting the statement's implications. He understood his friend's shock. Rebus' position on Lighthouse Council made such an entanglement with Lorridon a true conflict of interest, maybe even treason. But how could Rebus even communicate with Lorridon? Nate frowned in puzzlement. Unaware of the group's response due to the long, light-speed communication lag, Jabin continued, and Nate got his answer. "Rebus had an Energematrice 6 communication device that must have been built shortly after the escape, before Energematrice 6 machines were destroyed." Jabin shook his head. "We certainly have no such technology, or weren't aware of it until now." Jabin looked down at his hands. "Again, I apologize, though such a gesture seems futile. I've no idea how the situation reached this dire state. He looked back up at the camera. If you wish to return to Lighthouse, I will offer you my resignation personally, and you and Jesse Galton may oversee the selection of a new council at your discretion. Enough time had passed that Nate was feeling the full force of anger from being spaced. A part of him very much wanted to take Jabin up on his offer, and to punish Rebus, perhaps by subjecting him to the same treatment Nate himself had been given. The thought made him smile grimly, but he forcibly pushed the anger aside, facing the situation coldly and clearly. From across the bridge, Jesse shook his head sadly.
He's a good sort, really. Too patient and not nearly suspicious enough, maybe, but a good sort.
Kevin snorted in obvious disagreement, but said nothing. Nate queued up the control station he'd taken in order to respond, and said, Elder Jabin, while I appreciate your apology, I don't foresee returning to Lighthouse Station in the near future. He paused, then said evenly, I've also made a decision. During our time on Hope 1, we found the artifact that holds the Veil of Mysteries in place around Sanctuary. I've deactivated it. The veil is currently dissipating. We don't know how long it will take, but expect the position of Sanctuary to be exposed within a few weeks at most. I leave to your discretion whether you resign, but I think your people might benefit from your leadership, and you personally might find some measure of redemption if you choose to remain at the head of the council. Despite what he'd said to Jabin, Nate couldn't help taking some dark satisfaction in his message. There was a certain undeniable symmetry to the situation. They had tossed Nate out an airlock, intending to expose him to the vacuum. He, in turn, removed their protection and exposed them to the rest of the galaxy. Nate felt doubt prickling along the edges of his certainty, finally, as his anger subsided and he thought about what the newly exposed Lighthouse Station would likely face, whether from pirates or more territorially inclined powers. When Jabin's reply arrived almost 20 minutes later, his face was bone white, and his voice was panicky. My Lord Brightstar, we have detained Rebus and the others, and he will stand trial. Is there anything else we can do in apology for our mistake? Anything that might convince you to change your mind? We are not prepared for such exposure. The Keeper is gone. We will be destroyed. Jabin shook his head, looking horrified and bewildered, and after a moment of helpless silence, the transmission ended. Nate's reply this time was gentle. Elder Jabin, I had decided even before we returned to Lighthouse that the time had come for Sanctuary to rejoin the galaxy. Throwing me out an airlock made it easier, but I would have done it anyway. You need the broader galaxy, and it needs you. I think you underrate your own resourcefulness and capability. I know for a fact that you have many Energematrices among you. I do recommend you prepare for visitors, welcome or otherwise. Nate paused, then smiled a genuine, if wry, smile. Believe it or not, I wish you the best. I did not make my decision out of spite. Lightmaker watch over you, Elder Jabin. It took 20 more minutes for Jabin's reply to come, leaving Nate plenty of time to question his own decision. Was it really too late? Could he return the veil to its former state? Jabin was right that an entire planet and the station it supported were at stake. Still, Nate hadn't made his decision lightly. It really was high time Lighthouse Station rejoined the galaxy, and there was the matter of the veil itself. When Jabin's reply finally came, his face was drawn, but he looked resigned. Very well. I thank you for your kind words. They are more than we deserved under the circumstances. Lightmaker watch over you also. And for Jesse, I want you to know we'll all miss you. Jabin clear. In the aftermath of Jabin's call, everyone on the bridge was silent for a long time. Nate found himself reflecting on what had happened aboard Lighthouse Station, and now, in hindsight, feeling another flash of anger toward Rebus, and wondering in turn what instructions Drake Loridan had given the corrupt elder. Kevin interrupted his thoughts, blurting, I gotta learn to keep my abyssal mouth shut. He was looking down, and Nate stared at him in perplexity. Kevin squirmed under his gaze, then continued. They got to me, Nate. While we were on Lighthouse, Rebus found me. I let some stuff slip that I shouldn't have. Nate's eyebrows rose, and he stared at Kevin, waiting for him to finish. After a moment, Kevin continued, shamefaced. I told him you'd killed or changed. I told him you'd banished the shade, when you escaped from Lorien, I mean. Then I told him the Logans were from the Milky Way. I didn't mean it. It slipped out. Rebus and one of his goons got me alone. They were trying to make me help them. Kevin paused again, uncomfortably, then added, They never told me what they were planning. I'd never have kept something like that from you if I knew. Nate's piercing stare morphed into an exasperated sigh. He shook his head and grumbled. I know you told me you were a spy even before we left Eteria. But really? You just blurted it out to the first person who asked? Kevin shrank into himself. But it was Rebus. His protest seemed almost desperate. He's counsel. I mean, I grew up here. Nate held up a hand to stop him. So it wasn't the first person who asked. It was a councilman from your home who you'd known most of your life and probably been bullied by before. Kevin started to open his mouth to answer, but Nate shook his head and held up his hand once more. We have to figure out how to keep you from spilling the beans when somebody you know shows up. Nate grimaced and shook his head again. In this case, I don't think you've done any particular harm, though. His grin morphed into a smirk. I can only imagine the confusion that particular report is causing back at the Telestry, and I suspect they would have found out anyway. Somebody's going to discover Resolute at some point. Kevin stared blankly at Nate for a moment, then a wave of relief crossed his face, and he nodded. Yeah, I've got to learn to keep my mouth shut. Nate sighed and nodded. And Kevin, I didn't escape from Lorien. I left. Then, angling to lighten the mood, Nate looked around with a whimsical grin. Anybody else have any admissions while we're about it? Somebody stow a change in one of the cargo holds? To his surprise, as he looked around at the faces of his friends, Shauna wouldn't meet his eye. He stared at her, not entirely sure what to say, until she blurted,
I kept the piece of the black gem.
Nate's eyebrows climbed his forehead once more, and he just continued to stare at her as his stomach did a flip-flop. Kevin's admission had been disappointing, but not particularly damaging. Shauna's left him a bit stunned, and even more uneasy. Kevin, on the other hand, was sharply interested. His eyes fixed on Shauna, and he seemed about to say something, then changed his words at the last moment. What piece? Shauna bit her lip, and tears came to her eyes. She held out her hand to Nate, obviously clutching what he assumed must be the shard of the black gem. Nate hesitated, then reluctantly held out his hand, asking, Why, Shauna? Why did you bring it?
I don't know.
She was caught between utterly embarrassed and, somehow, confused.
Something came over me. I still don't really understand it.
Nate stared grimly as she set a short, sharp piece of what felt like broken glass carefully into his palm. Immediately on contact with the shard, Nate shuddered as something seemed to stare at his back. Feeling as if he'd been bitten, he dropped the black shard on the console in front of him, which caused the sensation to disappear as quickly as it had come, then returned his gaze to Shauna, now feeling troubled. Hesitantly, she asked,
Was it, watching you, too?
Nate nodded, thoughtfully, eyeing the irregular piece of crystal without speaking. He really wasn't sure what to do with it. His first instinct was to toss it out into space, but at the thought he got an immediate check. Some instinct told him that would be a bad idea. He stared at the shard for a long moment, then caught Kevin looking at it as well, and grimaced. Shauna cleared her throat and asked,
So, who's watching us? Could it be this Drake Lorien? I mean, I don't know.
Of course it is! Kevin's exclamation was short and sharp. Lorden's got his fingers in every pie. Why wouldn't it be?
How would Lorden have access to an artifact that's been in Hope 1 since Dad left?
Rachel obviously stumbled over the last of her thought, but she shook her head to emphasize the point.
I could see an artifact coming from Lastus Raylan, or Hillman maybe?
Her eyes were dark as she uttered the final name.
Or someone, something we've never seen before.
Jesse put in.
Drake Lorden's only one of the major powers in the galaxy, even as leader of the Telestry.
Kevin scowled. Don't sell him short. Lorden's got a longer reach than you think. Nate shrugged. No way of telling without actually trying to follow the link back to whoever controls it. And that seems like the worst idea of all. For now, I'm just going to put it away. I'll figure out what to do with it later. He unstrapped himself from the console, then grabbed the shard once more, grimacing as the sense of being watched returned. He pushed himself toward the main hatch leading into the corridor. As he turned to head toward his compartment, Nate heard someone behind him and turned his head to see Kevin. His hand tightened on the shard, remembering Kevin's reaction to holding the black gem on Hope 1. Kevin stopped at the hatch, though, seeming hesitant. A few seconds passed before he called after Nate's retreating form. Thank you for not leaving me behind. Their first day of waiting for the veil to dissipate was spent recuperating. Nate from his entropic shock and the others from their long day exploring Hope 1. Near the end of the ship's day, Andrew stopped next to Nate where he sat in the galley and slammed a metal cube down on the table in front of him. It looked heavy, even though it was small enough he could have held it in one hand. He looked up at Andrew, who was actually scowling at him, feeling a bit like an animal that had wandered onto a busy road in the middle of the night, transfixed by oncoming headlights.
Use that for your extropy instead of our shade-blasted walls, would you?
Andrew grumped. Nate's eyebrows rose. What? Extropy? Andrew glowered at him.
You left a nasty handprint in the wall just inside the airlock from your stunt with Jesse, and there's no way I can fix it. Anytime I try to do anything, the surface just flakes away. I'd have to strip it back a full inch just to stop it from crumbling, every time I try to clean it. That's without even mentioning the one you left in Laura's room.
Oh. Nate winced and nodded, then picked up the cube in both hands. It fit on one palm, but it was so heavy it took both hands for him to lift it. I take it this is for me to destroy instead of the walls? Andrew nodded back.
Tungsten should soak up plenty of extropy.
Extropy. Got it. Nate grinned. I'll try to avoid messing up the walls from now on if I can help it. During the second day of waiting, John took Nate aside to talk. When they reached Nate's room, it took a while for John to find the words he wanted, but eventually he said,
That was entropic shock. When we got you inside, you could have died if you were out there much longer, Nate.
Nate frowned and shook his head. I don't understand it myself. If I did, this would be a lot easier. You know my memory isn't whole. He felt troubled, as if his mind were far away on something else. John nodded slowly, then asked,
So what are you planning to do? You don't seem keen on going after the Dominion.
Nate grimaced. Seems like everybody else wants me to go after them, doesn't it? John grinned.
Something tells me that what everybody wants doesn't really play into your plans.
Nate shrugged. It's what everybody needs that has me concerned, and most of them don't even know what that is. He stared at the globe of the veil, securely tucked into the netting in his couch, and shook his head slowly. I can see everything so clearly. The big picture, I mean. I can see it like it's right here in front of me. Loredan, the Dominion, they're only the tiniest part of this. What I can't always see is the part I'm to play in it all. Not until the time comes. The Lightmaker's plans are beyond me, but when I need to move, it's like when you went with the Keeper. I knew the time had come for you to go, and that I couldn't. There was no doubt in my mind. Before that moment, I had no idea. Nate reached into his pocket and pulled out the 3 amulets that remained unclaimed from their visit to Hope 1. I still have these. That means there must be more of us, and beyond that I have to tell people. John looked at Nate curiously.
More of us? What do you mean? And tell people what?
More odds, I suppose? Nate sighed and shook his head, then grinned crookedly at John. I have to tell them what's coming, but they wouldn't believe me if I tried. People are too comfortable. Some of what's coming is bad. He paused, and his eyes grew dark. Then his grin returned. Some of it's good, too, but so much will just be different. John frowned, seeming a bit worried.
Nate, if anyone in the galaxy is ready for you, it would have to be the people here, in Sanctuary. What sort of welcome do you think we'll get anywhere else?
Nate shrugged and headed toward the hatch. I think it's time we restocked Adamant. After that? His eyes were distant and his grin faded into grim sobriety. Lightmaker only knows. The Energematrice6 podcast is made possible by North Arrow Coffee. North Arrow Coffee is the pro-life coffee company where 15% of every purchase goes to support organizations like Crisis Pregnancy Centers, whose purpose is to support women in the most difficult situation of their lives. If you're interested, head over to northarrowcoffee.co and use promo code E6 to get 10% off with your order.
The advertisements featured did not necessarily represent my endorsements or views.
And that concludes Chapter 9 of The Vale of Mysteries. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Oldest, and thank you, Second. Appreciate everybody being here. A quick note before we head out. There's a question about how we're going to handle the next couple of chapters. There's a couple of upcoming semi-guest appearance cameos, and there's scheduling issues, so we will try to get them out on time, but no promises. Do appreciate everybody being here, and we'll catch you all next time.